All right, welcome into Dawg Walk Talk, the Georgia Spring Practice Edition. Palmer Tom's joining me. I'm Wes Blankenship. Thanks for lending us your ears as we hopefully educate, inform, entertain you about the Georgia Bulldogs. Palmer, we've had 2 sessions with Kirby Smart to get to hear from him. We heard from Stetson Bennett, Keely Ringo, and Warren McClendon last night. What is standing out to you so far, getting to see the Dogs, the defending national champions, even though Kirby doesn't want us to call them that? What's standing out to you as you've seen the Dogs thus far in 2022?
Yeah, I think it's just that they don't want to be feeling like they have to defend their title from 2021. They want to make that a separate deal. They want to celebrate that. They want the players to remember the great feeling that was to bring home a national title for the first time in 41 years. And then they want to put that aside and strive to go win another one. I mean, and I think that's exactly what every Georgia fan wants to hear, that Kirby Smart isn't complacent with just winning one. He doesn't want to be a one-hit wonder, and ultimately that starts with this upcoming team, and that starts this spring. The leaders of this team have to step up and refocus everyone, not just themselves, not just the guys that are stepping into bigger roles. They need to refocus the entire team, because I think that everyone around Georgia football, from the coaches to the staffers to the players to the fans and the media members too, I think are still, when they think Georgia football, they think defending national champions, and that's not what Kirby Smart wants the case to be. So I think that's my biggest takeaway so far. I think it's been very interesting to hear from some of these players and have them reiterate what Kirby said. That's typically the case, but I think that when you hear guys like Nolan Smith come out and say, hey, we're not defending it, we're here to win another one. It was a pretty assertive statement, and I think that's got to be reassuring to Georgia fans that might have seen a team like LSU after that 2019 season come back and not have a great year. We've seen teams have a splash before, but that's all it was. It wasn't a big wave of success. It was just a splash. And I think that if you're a Georgia fan, you want this national championship to be a continuum of the energy and the momentum that Georgia has built up during the Kirby Smart era, and you want it to be the start of something new. You want it to be the start of a dynasty of sorts. I think that you can't really have that conversation yet. I think they've got to go win another one before that you can have that dynasty conversation, but I think that Georgia is well on its way towards making progress towards winning another one.
I mean, you look at the list of national champions and the college football playoff era, the BCS era, AP era before that. It's really freaking hard to repeat. Only one repeat out of Kirby Smart's time at Alabama. And before that, Southern Cal was the only team to do it in the BCS era in 2003 and 2004. So it's difficult. But I think the dynasty is the more attainable goal, the more realistic goal for Georgia, and that's what they're looking at right now. And that's the kind of mindset that separates them from what LSU probably was. I think LSU definitely had a once-in-a-generation kind of offense, similar to how Georgia had a once-in-a-generation kind of defense. But I see a focus in Kirby Smart's eyes, and I see a determination in what his vision for the program is. And I'm not saying that Ed O didn't have that, but clearly he didn't have that focus to keep things on the rails. And I got to think that Kirby Smart's 10,000-foot view of this program, and maybe LSU's falling off, serves as somewhat of a warning to him, to how easy it is to fall off and how hard it is to repeat. I think the guys that we heard from last night, specifically Keely Ringo and Stetson Bennett, we're recording this on Tuesday, March 23rd. Those are 2 guys that, if you want to talk about having to, look ahead to this season and put aside everything that they went through in the aftermath of winning the Natty, Those are two guys that probably have the most difficult time doing it, I would have to imagine, if I'm putting myself in their shoes. Stetson Bennett said that his world blew up after he won the Natty. Keely Ringo goes from, making plays off and on throughout the season to having now arguably the most memorable play of Kirby Smart's entire career at Georgia right now, that pick six to end the national championship with an exclamation point. How do you feel like these guys can actually do that? Do you think they can, or at this point, do you feel like it's much easier said than done to put that celebration behind them and actually look ahead to playing more football games in 2022?
You mentioned those two guys, and I think that they are two examples of guys that played good football but didn't necessarily play their best football last year. I think that the best is yet to come for Stetson Bennett and Keely Ringo. Both of them indicated that yesterday, that, in the case of Bennett, he decides to come back for a sixth season of college football because he thinks he's capable of doing more. Maybe that doesn't necessarily mean that he's capable of doing more than winning the program's first national championship in 41 years, but on a personal, individual level, he thinks that he can do more. And I think that that's got to be a driving factor for him. Same thing with Keely Ringo. We heard him say, hey, I can let that one play define me, or I can, use it as momentum and ride it to the mountaintop. And he's looked around at other guys that have made big plays before and how they've used that to propel their careers. I think both those guys are certainly getting the push from Kirby to do that. Stetson and Kirby had some honest conversations during the offseason is what we heard yesterday. And that, they had to have a little bit of, Stetson had to gain a little bit of trust out of those conversations. Hear the things that he wanted to hear. He said he heard some of those things. He didn't hear some of those things. But ultimately, the best place for him to develop as a football player, which is exactly what he wants to do, play football and get better at playing football, was the University of Georgia. I think in the case of Ringo, you're looking at a former five-star, number one cornerback in his class, who last year was really his first season. Obviously, he was in Athens during that 2020 season, but out with a shoulder injury the entirety of that year. So last year was really, his quote-unquote freshman year. He was a redshirt freshman last year. So as he takes that next step as a sophomore, can he be out to the league in 3? That's certainly a possibility. And I think that when he was coming in, I think you probably would have thought that was going to happen. So I think that both those guys are focused, in turning the page from that national championship game where they both made, big milestone plays of their career, of Georgia's history. Turning the page to 2022 shouldn't be too hard for them because both of them have improvement that they can make. I think it's probably harder. Let's say Nakobe Dean had come back to Georgia. It would have been harder for him to turn the page from 2021 to 2022, in my opinion, because there's not much room for him to improve. That's why we're seeing him mocked as a first-round pick. Those guys would have had a harder time, putting that behind them. But the guys that decided to come back, you're looking at Stetson Bennett, like we said, a lot to improve. Kenny McIntosh is coming into a bigger role. You've got A.D. Mitchell coming back, Ladd McConkey coming back, Kyrus Jackson. All those guys still have things that they can show. Kyrus can show that he was healthy, what he can do when he was healthy. AD and Ladd both were really in their first seasons on the scene and can continue to make steps forward in their career. Brock Bowers, again, he may be the hardest one to put that last season behind him because it was so successful for him. Exactly. So he may have the hardest time putting it behind him. But I think that that's a kid that is has good roots there and understands that there is, he has two more years at Georgia ahead of him, and there's no reason that his first year should define his career I think that if he wants to, he has a chance to be a first-round pick here in a couple of years, and that's not going to happen just based off the merits of what happened in his freshman season. He's going to have to continue to improve. Offensive line, we heard that same narrative from Cedric Van Pran, that they felt that they were good but not good enough last year, that they didn't win the Joe Moore. Defensively, you've got everyone essentially being replaced. You're bringing back Ringo, but like we said, he can still improve. Chris Smith made the decision to come back. If he was ready to go pro, he would have gone pro. William Poole is in that same boat. Nolan Smith is in that same boat. These are all guys that decided to come back for a reason, and it wasn't to go win a national championship. Obviously, they would love to do that again. I think that when guys came back after that 2020 season, it was because they had unfinished business. There's not unfinished business here. It's improvement that these guys want to make on an individual level. And as they do that as individuals, collectively this team can do that and make steps towards, like we said, winning another national championship.
Another big story coming into spring practice is the departure of Matt Luke being replaced by Stacey Searles. We heard from Warren McClendon last night about the differences between Searles and Matt Luke. It seems like Searles is a lot more of a tactician. He's very technical, whereas Matt Luke, the story around him is that he's a very motivational kind of guy, and it seems to be two different kind of styles. From what you've heard from Van Pran and now from McClendon, Warren Erickson, what do you feel like these guys are learning from Stacey Searles? There was so much concern from Georgia fans around this hire. I think hearing from some of the players now maybe calming those Georgia fans down a bit, because Matt Luke was tough to replace. Sam Pittman was even tougher to replace. It feels like Kirby Smart is going to hire who he needs to hire to not only keep the status quo at each position group, but also make it better.
Yeah, I think that when you're talking about Stacey Searles, that's exactly what he's wanted to do. Keep Georgia's offensive line up to the standard of where they have been in the past. He understands where it has been in the past because he was a part of that past, as a coach here previously. I think that, like you said, replacing Sam Pittman was tough because, look, the guy has gone on to go be a successful SEC head coach. Replacing Matt Luke is tough because the guy was an SEC head coach and a very successful SEC offensive coordinator before he was the offensive line coach here. Both those guys have, a background in coaching that is really hard to replicate. And I think that when you talk about Stacey Searles, he's obviously got a extended career in coaching. Hasn't been the head coach that Pittman is now and that Luke was before he came. But I think that experience is what sets him apart. And it is what ultimately is helping him make this transition where, like you said, it's really tough to replace those guys. But I think that these offensive linemen understand that they can make steps forward as a group, as individuals, and that Searles is helping them do that already. It seems like just the way that he is delivering messages in practice seems to be getting across to these guys. I'm going to be very interested to hear more and more about him. But the early returns have been pretty good. And I think that's the case for all these UGA assistants.
Yeah, we heard from Kirby on Fran Brown as well. He didn't mention Brian McClendon by name, but we've seen McClendon in some clips that Georgia's put out. Looks like he's fitting in well. looks like he hasn't left, honestly. So it's good for McClendon to be back on his old stomping grounds. But Fran Brown is the one, you really don't have a lot of buzz typically around secondary coaches. And Fran Brown is the one whose name continues to come up. Georgia just got a commitment from Antion Jackson out of the class of 2024, a 4-star DB. and he said that Fran Brown already had a relationship with him. When he came to Georgia, it was a no-brainer for him. Kirby raving about him as well. What's your perception been hearing about Fran Brown since before, we've even heard Kirby talk about him, before we've heard recruits weigh in on him? What do you feel like he's bringing to the Dogs in his new role here in Athens?
Yeah, I think Fran Brown has been the most impressive of the hires so far. Like you said, McClendon is back in his old territory where he feels comfortable, and I think that's a good thing. And I think Uzo Duribe is continuing to get more and more comfortable. But Fran Brown, I feel like since he's come on at Georgia, we've heard nothing but good things about him. Not to say that we've heard bad things about the other guys, but I think what we've heard about Brown has been especially impressive to me because, looking around on social media, I think that people are starting to recognize that this is a young coach that's making steps in the right direction towards one day being a head coach. I saw a ranking of, top 50 college football assistants with potential to be a head coach, and Brown was listed among them. It's not often that you see, a position coach listed there. Most of the time it's just coordinators and, offensive and defensive coordinators. So I think that the fact that somebody like Brown is making these steps in the right direction this early in his coaching career says a lot about him as a person on and off the field. He's making those relationships both with recruits, as we see with Jackson, but as also with his current players. We've heard from Chris Smith and Keely Ringo on that. I think it's hard to coach in the secondary at Georgia because look at who your head coach is. It's a former DB himself. Look at who your defensive coordinator is. It's a former DB himself. Both those guys are very hands-on, and we saw that yesterday at practice. Both those guys were, spending a lot of time with those DBs. But Fran Brown was just as much involved, and I think that he is somebody we will continue to hear his name, in terms of young coaches that are on their way to becoming even more successful. It would not surprise me. I think it's going to be hard for Georgia to hold on to Fran Brown for an extended period of time. It may be a one-and-done type deal where he's in and out of Athens in 1 year and on to a coordinating position if Georgia doesn't have one to offer. And so I think that that's certainly going to be something interesting to watch. But I think that early on in his time in Athens, the returns have been great so far. I mean, quite literally, you're bringing in a player, and you've already got a commit under your belt. So I think that you're going to see this secondary continue to improve. They've got a good bit to replace in Lewis Seen and Darian Kendrick leaving. Star position is up for grabs. I think, but they also have a good bit of experience returning with Chris Smith, Keely Ringo, and then guys that played roles in a rotation like Dan Jackson, William Poole, Kamari Lassiter, Javon Bullard. All those guys are eager to compete. They're young for the most part. I mean, with the exception of Poole there, who's the super senior. They're young for the most part, but I think that they're talented and ready to compete for jobs. Nyland Green, Dalen Everett too. Both those guys are involved in the competition at cornerback. And so I think that you've got a young coach who is eager to coach, and you've got a young group who is eager to fight for a spot on the field. And to me, that's a great combination.
What'd you make of Kirby Smart kind of sidestepping the question about who Georgia's defensive coordinator will be? Obviously, Glenn Schumann and Will Muschamp were kind of listed as co-defensive coordinators, rumored to be that, but when asked about it in his first spring practice availability, Kirby said that only matters to you guys. And when he says you guys, he means us in the media. Do you feel like that's overblown, or do you feel like it is important for Georgia to actually list who its defensive coordinator or coordinators are?
Yeah, I do think it is important from a media perspective. I think it's important from a fan perspective, but I think ultimately everyone knows whose defense this is. It wasn't Dan Lanning's defense. It isn't going to be Glenn Schumann or Will Muschamp defense. It's Kirby Smart's defense. And so, you can have a title on a coach like that, but ultimately it's going to be a group effort. The head coach is going to be very involved in this defense because he has the background that he has. I think that ultimately when decisions are being made in that defensive room, you are going to have Will Muschamp and Glenn Schumann involved, but you're also going to have Kirby Smart involved. You're going to have Fran Brown involved. You're going to have Trey Scott involved. That's everyone among the defensive coaches. Chidera Uzodiribe too. So I think that
defensive coordinator by committee.
Yes, exactly. That's to me, that seems like how it has been in the past. Dan Lanning has kind of spearheaded that. But I think that with him moving on, you've seen Georgia turn things over here in the past. Moving from Mel Tucker to Dan Lanning, they made that transition to a guy that was already on staff. But Glenn Schumann was very much involved in that defense too. I believe he was listed as a co-defensive coordinator at the time, and is still listed as that. Now with Will Muschamp coming in, he was involved in that defense last year. Lewis Seen called them a group of masterminds last year, and I think that that's exactly how Kirby Smart wants this defensive staff to be. I think he wants it to be a group of masterminds that he can mold into his own, defensive proteges. Guys like Brown and Uzodiribe being on the younger side, Trey Scott being on the younger side when he came in here. Same with Glenn Schumann. Really the only experienced guy that he's brought in is one of his best friends in Will Muschamp, and somebody that he has worked with before, and really learned from a lot in his time that he spent with Muschamp.
Last question for you here. Last topic of discussion, I should say. Kirby seemed a little concerned with the leadership of yesterday's practice specifically. We don't have that kind of time to evaluate or expertise to evaluate how good or how bad Georgia's leadership is at this point. But what do you feel like the Dogs' biggest concern is, the biggest question mark for the team? Do you feel like it's leadership, or do you feel like it's a position group? He also is concerned about depth at wideout and at DBs. He kind of cited the transfer portal, the lure, the temptation of transferring as, part of the reason why those position groups are as thin as they are, and we've definitely seen those groups hit. So do you feel like it's an intangible thing like leadership, or do you think Georgia's biggest concern at this point is depth at a position group?
Yeah, I would say leadership is something that you're going to have to replace every year. You're never going to see, it's why senior day is always so sad for these guys. The end of the season is so sad for these guys because they realize that team will never be together again. Maybe some of the individuals will play together again, but that team and that identity, that leadership group will never, there will never be another Jordan Davis, Nakobe Dean, Zamir White-led Georgia team.
I mean, how viral has that clip of Nakobe Dean chewing out Channing Tindall and then immediately getting a result out of Channing Tindall? We've seen that time and time again. That is visible leadership.
Exactly. So, I think that in the case of Kirby's concerns over leadership, I think that that's probably something that's being blown a little bit out of proportion. I would say that 4 practices in the spring, you're probably not going to have your leaders set in stone. That's something that's formed over time. As Stetson said, they had less time in their off-season workouts than they normally would have, and I think that's something that they're happy to have had less time because of why they had less time. They were going and winning the national championship, but I think that that the fact that they had less time to establish leaders there is showing now. A week into spring practice. So I think that, and again, like I said, I think every year you're seeing a turnover of leadership. It takes guys going through some tough times together to kind of figure out who the leaders are going to be. I think we can all name a couple of guys that we expect it to be. It's those veteran guys that decided to come back. It's Stetson Bennett. It's Nolan Smith. It's Kenny McIntosh stepping into a bigger role. It's Christopher Smith. It's Kyrus Jackson. It's all these guys that we have seen, perform on the field. Those are who we expect to be the leaders. But I think that some of that, some of that leadership has to be earned, and it has to be earned, within this team. And so. I think that's probably blown a little bit out of proportion. I also think that the depth concerns are probably a little bit blown out of proportion because you don't have your full team for the fall here. You're gonna bring in, they have 18 early enrollees that they'll bring in a couple more guys in the fall, and talented guys too. Kirby talks about his concerns at defensive back. Well, they've got. At least two very talented DBs coming in Jaheim Singletary and Julian Humphrey. So those guys can step in and help immediately. I think that at wide receiver, they've got Dylan Bell, they've got Cole Spear. Those are guys that will, be helpful to them, right away in terms of depth. They may not be contributors right away, but that's not Kirby's concern. Kirby's concern is depth at that position, being able to run a practice. I mean, G-Day is going to be interesting to see because, you have to fill out two full teams of these guys, and that's always tough. Looking at the running back room, Kirby didn't mention it, but they only have 3 scholarship guys this spring. They're bringing in 2 more, so that, you're not going into the fall with 3 scholarship guys. You're going into the fall with a full 5, assuming nobody transfers. And that's another thing. Georgia will have guys leave in the transfer portal. We saw Owen Condon enter the transfer portal on the first day of spring, but I think that Georgia will also there's also a good chance that Georgia's going to gain some people from the transfer portal. They haven't done it yet. They don't have the spots to do it yet, but as other guys leave, there will be holes that open up. As Kirby notices these holes open, holes that he has during spring practice, he will go after some of those guys in the transfer portal and make a splash. Because if you look at the guys that they have, brought in the past, it has been post-spring for the most part.
All right, wrapping up here on Dawg Walk Talk. And Palmer, we had one of the more interesting Georgia press conferences I think I've ever been a part of last night. Stetson Bennett really fueled a lot of that, I feel like, because he got to comment on being an answer on, or a question. What is it? He was an answer on Jeopardy. The answer was Stetson Bennett led this team to a national title over SEC rival Alabama. The question, of course, who are the Georgia Bulldogs? So Stetson got to answer that. He had to answer about upgrading from his flip phone. He answered a question about the strangest moment he had this offseason. He said someone DM'd him about purchasing an armadillo and said that because Stetson's made good decisions in the past, he feels like he could make good decisions about this. $10,000 for a striped armadillo purchase, and Stetson recommended that the person go for it. And then he asked him about a different exotic animal. Like,
with a life expectancy of 20 to 30 years, like Stetson told us for that armadillo, seems like a great call. I just hope that armadillo is being named Stetson or Bennett.
Oh, for sure. No, it's got to be named Stetson or Mailman or something.
Yeah.
But just a very, very strange interaction, I would say. we were talking about our favorite Athens.
You haven't gotten any DMs like that in the DawgsHQ accounts?
No, nothing about any armadillos. No exotic animals. And if they did, I'd probably call the cops, to be honest, because I don't have any kind of expertise in that area. That's better reserved for someone like the Tiger King, I feel like. So we were talking before Kirby came in. It was a little bit later than we expected, and we were all pretty hungry. And we were talking about our favorite pizza locations in Athens for one reason or another. You mentioned that you had a sub. You had a leftover sub. So you kind of started this whole thing. A calzone. And we started talking about our favorite Athens pizza joints.
Was great to have that after practice.
What was in it?
It was a chicken bacon ranch calzone.
Ooh, CBR. All right, so anyways, we're talking about our favorite Athens pizza shops, and everyone is starving at this point. We've been covering, y'all have been at practice. I showed up just for the video portion and thought I was going to be on time. Things didn't start until about an hour later. So we're all pretty hungry. Well, Kirby gets the last question of the press conference, and he's asked what his top 3 Athens pizza joints are.
Kirby, we were talking about pizza while we were waiting.
Where is it? I'm hungry.
You got a top 3 in pizza?
Like styles or like?
Or in Athens?
Man, if I do that, I'll throw somebody out of the
I can't get
3. My kids could do that. I got Andrew's out there somewhere. He could tell you flat out. I usually get the subs. I get a meatball sub when it's a pizza place. So I'll eat the leftover pizzas the kids don't eat. And you can tell. So see you.
Kirby is smart in this, no pun intended, in his response. He doesn't want to throw any Athens pizza locations under the bus. He doesn't want to single any of them out, leave any off of his list. He sidesteps the question, but says that when he goes to pizza places, he gets a meatball sub instead. But, Palmer, I do have to ask you, until DawgsHQ and the Dawg Walk Talk podcast really get into some serious pizza shop negotiations, I don't think we have to worry about hurting anyone's feelings. So what is on your list of top 3 Athens pizza joints?
Yeah, if anyone quickly wants to become the DawgsHQ favorite pizza joint, feel free to do so.
Please
couple
DM
for
us.
me. Yeah, please DM us about pizza or armadillos, whichever you prefer. For me, okay, so we're going with 3. I would say automatic pizza is a must. That place is great. The size of those slices, blows most places out of the water. Speaking of most, Ted's Most Best. Big fan of there. You could throw Mellow Mushroom in there. I think it's a great bang for your buck. But I think
obviously a chain. It's a chain.
Yeah,
so
obviously a chain. So I won't throw it in there.
The chain.
I will go with tough spot here for that third. Tough decision here for that third spot. Deciding between Amici and Fully Loaded. I will go with Amici because my favorite thing at Fully Loaded is actually their wings. And as we record on Wednesday, I cannot wait to hit up Fully Loaded later tonight for some wings.
Wing Wednesday.
So those are my 3 top 3. But like you said, there are a lot of great pizza spots in Athens. Curious to hear what you have to say before I name any others that at least were in consideration.
So like Kirby, there's one pizza place where I am more of a sub guy than a pizza guy. And this is really a nostalgic pick for me. I haven't eaten anything from this place in college, but it's called Bulldog Pizza, BULLDAWG Pizza. It's out towards Macon Highway as you head towards the loop near George's Low Country Table. There's like a Shell gas station over there. I've never eaten there on location. but I ordered buffalo chicken subs from there in college, and look, they were late night orders. My perception of how good it was may have been enhanced by a little bit of, liquid persuasion. But that's my number 3 because it's a nostalgic go-to choice for me in college. So Bulldog Pizza, number 3. Number 2 is Mama Sid's over on Barnett Shoals. Palmer, I don't know if you've been out there or not, but it's kind of like the pizza buffet kind of style. It's a little bit different. They don't offer subs, I don't think. So that eliminates Kirby from that list because they don't have subs, as far as I know, on the menu. But a great selection, a lot of different choices you can get from there, and you go in there with your buddies and get a pitcher of beer, and the setting is perfect. Automatic is also my number 1, though. Feeding a family now with the size of those slices, like you mentioned, very economical choice. So that's my top 3, I would say. And yeah, if any of them want to host the show or have us do a live show, sponsor it, we just pay us in pizza, and maybe some money too. That would be good. But yeah, that's my top 3.
Pizza, beer, money. That's the way to our heart.
Absolutely. We're all college kids at heart. Palmer about to graduate. Me having graduated almost 10 years ago now. I still have some of that college guy inside me. So speaking of college guys and food being the way to our heart, Arch Manning was visiting Georgia over the past weekend, and I did kind of a column, semi-food review piece on DawgsHQ about my favorite spots. What would my perfect Athens weekend be? We got some really great responses from that on Twitter and on the Dawg Walk message board. So go check that out. Some really interesting responses from places that are closed now, even. 5 Star Day was a place I mentioned as, one of my favorite breakfast spots. And Kirby would love that place now because he loves 5 stars. So that would be an awesome spot if it still existed. But if you're an Athens person, if you love the classic city, definitely check that out. And also check out what Jake Roos had to say about Arch Manning's visit. It seemed like it went well, but Jake has a lot more insight, expertise into that than Palmer or myself do. But look, as far as I'm concerned, Georgia is never out of the running for anybody anymore. Another piece I wrote, I'm kind of doing a what if series. I did a what if Georgia won the 2012 SEC championship game. What would their season look like? What would the implications be down the road? And there's a lot of them, about how it could have impacted Mark Richt's career. I wrote on one this week, what if Georgia actually landed Deshaun Watson for one reason or another? I feel like Clemson was always kind of his destination because of his family ties, but Georgia wasn't really the choice for him. But now with a guy like Arch Manning, in the way and the depth, the persistence to which Kirby Smart recruits, no matter who's on this roster now, I feel like Georgia has a shot. In the Justin Fields competition with Jake Fromm, that narrative kind of gets muted, I feel like, from the critics because Georgia's won a national championship. Justin Fields never did. So can that narrative still be held against Kirby as much? He just won a national championship with a walk-on quarterback. What do you think he can do with with a guy of Arch Manning's caliber? And if not Arch Manning, maybe it's Dylan Raiola. Those are the names now that are constantly going to have a shot for Georgia. And I'm not even a recruiting expert, and I feel like that's what the Dogs are doing right now.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, with what Kirby Smart has done, coaching this team over the last couple of seasons, they've earned a spot at the table. With every recruit. As Jake pointed out from that Under Armour camp a couple weeks ago, he's starting to hear Georgia is Georgia, just like we heard Alabama is Alabama, and I think that. As Georgia is Georgia, as Kirby Smart, continues to be the, dominant force on the recruiting trail as Nick Saban gets older too. I think that Georgia will be in it with anyone and everyone that they want to be in it on. And I think that that's certainly the case with these quarterbacks. Raiola, as you mentioned, in that 2024 class. But there's been some conversation about him potentially reclassifying. And certainly with Arch as well in that 23 class. Certainly going to be interesting to see how the dominoes fall there, the first of which seem to be falling both in that
right on
24
Rocky
class
Top.
as Georgia. Yes, in that 24 class as Georgia gets their first commit, and in the 23 class as Tennessee picks up a quarterback commit, 5-star Nico Amalivia. So, and I probably
Very
butchered
tough
that
name in the transfer portal era. You got to watch him now because he might take off, man. Of course, the NIL conversation heating up, just beginning to heat up with that decision as well. You can read more about that over at On3's national coverage of that collective money going potentially into that recruitment. College football is changing a lot, Palmer. It's changing really quickly. If you want to read more about the Dogs specifically, make sure you head over to DawgsHQ.com. We have a spring ball special right now, 4 months for $10. That's 4 months for the price of 1 month typically. If you're already subscribed to us, go ahead and tell your buddies about that. If you're not subscribed, you enjoyed what we talked about on this podcast today, we go a lot deeper with our words written over there at DawgsHQ.com. So give us a shot. 4 months for the price of 1 right now. Look, it's a meal at Chick-fil-A for 4 months of our premium content. We're plugged into the team. We're plugged into breaking news. We're plugged into recruiting news, what they have to say about the Dogs. It matters a lot more than what Palmer and I have to say about their recruitment, I promise. So give us a shot. Follow us on Twitter at DawgsHQ, on Instagram at DawgsHQ, and also like us on Facebook if you're a Facebook user. A lot of fun to engage with over there as well. Palmer, thank you, man. Appreciate your insight as always. I'll see you at the next Georgia practice. And keep up the good work, my man. It's a fun time of year as we lead up to G-Day.
Absolutely, Wes. And like you said, a great time to join Dogs HQ with spring practice going on, new basketball coach, baseball in full season, and in full swing, no pun intended. But yeah, a ton of great content over at Dogs HQ, so I strongly encourage you all to come check us out.
Peace. We'll catch you next time.
See you.